Hi everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. My name is Joe Tilden and I am the host of this program. Well, here we are in the middle of August, and this is Fair Week in the Rutland area. This version of the fair is going to be opening, I believe, Tuesday night on the 13th, and will run actually about, I would say about 4 days maybe at the most. And of course, it's nowhere near what the fair used to be. And for some of us old timers, we kind of miss having the fair Labor Day week. You know, for many, many years, especially when I was a kid growing up, the fair house began on Labor Day and ran for 6 days. And then people got a little greedy and said, well, let's take all Labor Day weekend. And that cut into the Champlain Valley Fair up in Essex. And when you look at the difference in population, there was just too much drawing power in Essex, and they sort of prevailed. Well, the Rutland Fair has undergone some financial difficulties over the years, and I think about 3 years ago they decided to switch and go in the middle of August. And they follow the Addison County Field Days, which are held up in New Haven, Vermont, up in Addison County. We're in direct competition with the Orleans County Fair, which is held in Barton. Next week will be the Caledonia County Fair. And then the big one in Vermont is now the Champlain Valley Fair, which used to be the Champlain Valley Exposition, which will run for 9 days in Essex Junction. And that's a fair which, because of the large population in Chittenden County, usually draws around 300,000 people a year. Compare that to the Rutland Fair, which draws about 30 to 40,000. But I remember a few years back, when I was in grade school, I got my first paying job outside of mowing lawns, ushering on the grandstand down at the fair. Got $15 a week. It came out to 12 something after deductions for Social Security and all that. And I worked at the fair for a number of years. I ushered at Section C for 3 years, and then they put me, I think, on the box seats. And then I went to the role of being directing traffic. And then I went to the role of being gatekeeper, and very fortunately, I had the gate in front of the grandstand down next to the track. And since I was down there and had done sports for the Rutland Herald, in those days, of course, we had harness racing for 4 days. Began on Labor Day, and the final day of harness racing, that was Governor's Day in those days. And that was when they had their championship racing. They're so-called free-for-alls for pacers and trotters. And I used to do the reporting for the Herald on the 4 days of racing at the fair. There was no pari-mutuel then. You know, they're friendly betting. People wanted to bet. But we had some good horses down here. A lot of them had raced at Saratoga, and you had some great champs like Chris Spencer came down from the Shelburne Farms. Guy H., who was a great horse out of the province of Quebec. For a while, the world record for a half-mile track in pacing was held by a horse named Billy Direct. And he paced the track, I think it was 1:59. 1.59. And then he lowered that to 1.55. And that was the pacing record. The trotting record, and I can't remember who set that, but that was set at 1.59. And those records stood for a number of years until they were broken at other tracks around the country. But when I was younger and coming up, of course, you had the 4 days of harness racing. And then on Fridays we had auto racing. And they weren't the big cars we have now. They were cars that raced in Indianapolis, but they were the Offenhausers. Today they'd be more comparable to your midget car racers. But we had some famous drivers from Indianapolis. Ted Horn, who finished second in Indianapolis 3 years in a row, ran here. Wild Bill Holland, who won the Indianapolis. Lee Wallard, who won at Indianapolis, also raced here. And a number of other big name artists in the field of auto racing. And on Saturdays, we always had the hell drivers. For many years, it was Lucky Teeter, until he was killed in an automobile accident. And for a number of years, the final stunt, as you know, these were the cars come down, ride the ramps, and go up on two wheels, and all the rest of it. And their final stunt for a number of years was a head-on collision in front of the grandstand. And they'd have two old junkers, and there'd be two men in each car. The first guy would start the car up and get it going. They'd go in opposite directions around the track. And the guy driving would open the car door and roll out. And the guy in the back seat would lean up and steer. And then, of course, just before the collision, he'd hunker on down, and you had that head-on collision. Well, that proved to be a little bit too dangerous, and after a number of years, they came up with another conclusion. That was lining up a bus and putting a bunch of old junkers in front of it. And the final stunt that the hell drivers would do would be that run around the track, up the ramp, clear the bus, and land in the old junkers. And there was always that big final send-off, you know, they'd hype it. The PA announcer would hype it and get everybody all roused up and everything, and say, there goes Suicide Johnny Smith. Lady Luck on one shoulder, the Grim Reaper on the other. And the car would barrel around the track and up the ramp, clear the bus, smash into the cars. And then, of course, they'd have the work crew would go up, one guy would look in the car and he'd kind of go, oh, I think this is it. And everybody would hold their breath. And then Suicide Smith would come out of the car and it'd be a big round of applause. And that was usually the conclusion on the track. In those days, they had a stage in front of the grandstand. That stage has since been torn down, along with a judge's stand for the horse racing, a bandstand. And the Rutland City Band used to be their big week, playing down at the fair. My introduction to the fair, my father played in the band. He played the flute and piccolo. And we used to go down to the fair on Thursdays because you didn't have full day of school fair week. You'd start school on Wednesday. Tuesday was Children's Day. Start school on Wednesday. You'd have half a day on Thursday and half a day on Friday. So Thursday afternoons we'd go down to the fair. My mother and her friends would take all her kids down the fair. That was Governor's Day. And we'd go down Thursday afternoon. We watched the night show. Then I'd go back to the fair on Saturday with my father and be up on the bandstand watching Lucky Teeter's Hell Drivers. Later it was Jack Kochman's Hell Drivers, and then finally it became Ward Beam's World Champion Hell Drivers. So things of the past. I spent a number of years, working on the grandstand. Then I became the assistant superintendent of the grandstand for 2 or 3 years. I took some time off from working on the grandstand when I worked for the police department because That was overtime that week. He put in a lot of hours, but that was overtime. You know, you go in at 11 o'clock in the morning, work right through till midnight or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock the following morning. So after 8 hours, that was time and a half. Excuse me. And there was always a big paycheck the Wednesday after Fair Week that if you were behind on your bills, that pretty well covered it. Well, the fair went to Friday before Labor Day, ran 10 days, brought in Pari-Mutuel. Pari-Mutuel should have been a gold mine down there. But unfortunately, there were too many hands in the pot, and the fair kind of went belly up financially, which is the situation they're in now, is a critical financial situation, although things are a lot better. But having the fair in August, when you're only drawing 30, 40,000 people, that's hardly going to cover the expenses. Most of the work down there now is voluntary, because you can't afford a big payroll. And, well, when you only, I think last year the attendance was around 30,000. Back in the old days, Labor Day, I always used to draw between 35 and 39,000 just on Labor Day alone. And the biggest crowd they ever had there was 1946. It was Friday, the day of the auto racing. The crowd that day exceeded 80,000. It was somewhere up around 83, 84,000 people came to the fair that day to watch auto racing. World War II had come to an end, 1945. We'd had a fair in 45 because the war ended in August with Japan's surrender. But the fair came back 100% in 46. And I think we set all kinds of attendance records there. But that Friday, I know the attendance was all around 83, 84,000. People were sitting on the stage, they were sitting on the barn roofs, all around to watch the Offenhausers run around the track. Well, it's a far cry. Things are different. In those days, of course, we didn't have television. Nowadays, people do. Used to have a night show. And the night show usually featured a chorus line, 20 young ladies. They were the Manhattan Rockettes for a number of years. Or the Manhattan Roxyettes, they call them. They came from the Roxy Theater in New York. And they usually did 3 or 4 numbers. Then in between, you had vaudeville acts. And a number of the vaudeville acts had appeared on TV. Programs like the Ed Sullivan Show, the show that NBC had on Saturday nights called The Show of Shows, which ran an hour and a half. Used to be from 9 to 10:30 every Saturday night. They had Sid Caesar and Emergene Coca and a number of other comedians. And it featured a number of vaudeville acts. Well, a number of these acts, of course, they visited the various fairs. And we had a number of the acts that came up here that were on television. Some of them were on the called Broadway Open House, which was on NBC. It's now the late night show. Jerry Lester was the host of the Broadway Open House. And one of his props was a big, tall, blonde by the name of Dagmar. And she was well blessed by Mother Nature. But all she'd do is come out and sit on a stool for the whole show. She wouldn't say anything. That's all she did. Well, we had a dog, a brother and sister. And I named the male Senator Toby, after the senator from New Hampshire. And I named the female Dagmar after that prop on the Broadway open house show. Well, one of the guests on the Broadway open house show was a guy named Peg Bates. And where he got his name, he had a peg leg, and he was a dancer. And he was scheduled to come to the Rutland Fair. Well, he was on the late night show a couple of weeks before he was scheduled to come in Rutland. And the host of the show that night was Jack Parr. And so, discussion, they sit in the chair and there's the discussion. Dagmar sitting there on a stool looking at him and so forth. So Jack Parr says, well, what's on your agenda? Well, he says, I got to go up to some little jerk town up in Vermont. It's called the Rutland Fair. He says, I imagine some little hick town. But I'll go up there and entertain him for 2 or 3 nights. He says, do them good, get out of their pickup trucks, come down to their little fair, and I'll entertain them. Well, didn't set well. A lot of people watch Broadway open house. So, sure enough, Peg Bates came up to the Rutland Fair. When he was introduced as the feature act, came out on the stage, the grandstand was full. And people stood up and they booed. Oh, did they boo. And he came over and he says, wow. He said, this is bigger than I ever thought. Excuse me, having a little trouble here. He said, this is bigger than I ever anticipated. And he apologized for his remarks. He said, I shouldn't have made them. It was incorrect of me to do it. But he said, I'm here, I'm entertaining you people, and I'm glad to be here. But that didn't stop the boos. And he was here for 3 nights, and he got booed every night. But we had other acts. Carmel Quinn, who was a singer. There was I'm trying to think of their name now. The Fontaine sisters, who used to back up Perry Como, were here. And a number of other acts. We also had a high wire act of different sorts. And we also they let off with the high wire act, because you want to do that while you still had daylight. Then you went into an animal act. We had the seal act here for a number of years. And you also had a dog act, Sylvia and her poodles, and stuff like that. And that usually comprised the night show. The night show would usually come on about 7:30 and probably run to about 9:15 or so. And then people would go out on the midway. And we had the World of Mirth midway back in those days. And, well, it wasn't the cleanest midway around, let's put it that way. But they'd played in Essex the week before. And they'd come down from Essex on Sunday. They'd be at the Park Street crossing, and that's where they would unload. They'd come by train. And they used to use elephants and tractors to pull the wagons off the train and in the fairgrounds and set up. And they always had 3 girly shows, 2 white and 1 African. And the African show was always known as Gay New Orleans. And I remember ushering on the grandstand. They used to have a trumpet player down there. You know, one of the greatest trumpet players that I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot of them. And he used to play How High the Moon. Usually at 12 noon when the show would open, he'd come out and he'd play How High the Moon. And I always remember that, the best version of How High the Moon I ever heard. Well, later on, I was working for the police department. We used to have to patrol after the night show. We'd go in twos, and I was teamed up with Deputy Sheriff John Poljasic Sr. from Proctor. And we'd have to, go down and check out the various things that were going on. And tough duty. I always had to check out the girly shows. It's tough duty. Somebody had to do it. And I remember in particular one year, we went down and got a complaint that there was a guy not acting properly in gay New Orleans. So we went down. Sure enough, here's this guy down there, and he's reaching up and he's trying to grab the girl's ankles and stuff. And I recognized him, and he was an employee of the telephone company. And normally, he was a very, very good man. So I went over and talked to him and said, hey, buddy, I could see you'd had a little too much to drink. I said, hey, called him by name. And I said, you're getting these girls all upset. And he said, well, that's what I'm here for. And I said, no. I said, I tell you what. I said, why don't we take a little walk, and you take a little time, and just kind of relax and get straightened out and all that. Well, with the fair closing on Saturday, we usually work till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And come Sunday morning, got a couple hours sleep. I got up, went to 11 o'clock Mass at Christ the King. And who do I see there at Christ King Mass? My old buddy. He's there with his wife and 2 daughters, and I could see that he was not in the best of shape. He was very, very hungover. But he was back being a good father again. And I noticed, they went to communion, his wife and his 2 daughters, and he followed them down the aisle. And I figured, well, this guy takes one night out of the year and decides to have a fun night. And I said, now he's paying the price. But, those were some of the features of the fair. I used to go up to Tunbridge, and Tunbridge was kind of wild up there. And one of the things I used to like to watch was out in front of the grandstand. They had 2 girly shows. One was called Texas Guinea, and I don't know what the other one was called. But they would run opposite sides. And everybody would flock in to see one girly show. When that was over, you'd see them all come rushing out of there and headed into the next one. So, Tunbridge, of course, has, it's not as wild as it used to be. I remember one year up there, the police built like a holding area for the number of drunks that they arrested. They'd put them in the holding area. But I was up there one year. I was principal up at the elementary school in Tunbridge there for a little while. We used to have school Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday, kids had to get ready for the fair. Get their animals ready that they were going to show and display and all that. So I had the rest of the week off. But I remember this particular, I think it was a Friday night, if I recall correctly. And the police had built a holding area. And they hadn't made it very secure. And it was quite full that night. So all these people in there, they decided if they pushed on one wall, they could knock it down, which they did. They pushed out, they knocked the wall down. They're all hurting out there, and there's a state police cruiser parked out front. So they let the air out of the tires on the cruiser so that troopers wouldn't be able to pursue them. So, you know, a lot of memories of the fair. Now, the sync is kind of broken. It used to begin with the Addison County Field Days, which was held last week, and advertises itself, and probably rightly so, as the largest agricultural fair in Vermont. And of course, you know, Addison County is one of the top agricultural areas in the state of Vermont for dairy and for sheep, especially dairy and sheep. There's also the Morgan Horse Farm in Weybridge, which is just northwest of Middlebury. And the Addison County Field Days are held up at New Haven. Then you also had the fair up in Barton, the Orleans County Fair. And that would open on a Tuesday and run through Saturday. Then you had the Caledonia County Fair, which is held in Lyndonville. And then from there, everybody went to Essex. You had the Champlain Valley Exposition. And then down to Rutland for the Rutland Fair. And then up to Tunbridge for the Tunbridge Fair. And it all concluded with the Eastern States Exposition in West Springfield, Massachusetts. And if you haven't been to the East Springfield or the Eastern States Exposition, that's a tremendous show. Shows the best of New England, and we include New York State in there, even though they have their own series of fairs, including their state fair at Syracuse, which I believe is also running this week. So we're getting close to fair season. The thing I liked about the fair is the fact that it was an agricultural show. We always had the cattle cavalcade, and that was always held on Governor's Day, which used to be Thursday and then went to Wednesday. All these 4-H kids who would raise their cows and their horses and their sheep. It was primarily the cows. And the cattle cavalcade, I'll get it right, would parade around the track in front of the grandstand. And these kids would get a chance to show off the work that they had done in 4-H. Of course, 4-H was much larger in those days. And I was thinking of that a few years ago when I was on the Board of Aldermen. And Jim Douglas was the governor of the state of Vermont at the time. And the attraction at the fair, it's Saturday night. And I'm trying to think of the Oak Ridge Boys. And Mrs. Douglas was a great fan of the Oak Ridge Boys. So she persuaded the governor, she didn't want to spend the whole day at the fair. So she persuaded the governor to get a stand-in. And the stand-in he got was Mayor Casarino. Well, Mayor Casarino was going to be tied up at the Open Door Mission. So he gave me a call. And he said, would you represent me and represent the governor in handing out the 4-H awards this year at the fair? So I did. And one of the things that impressed me, there were a lot of awards, and a number of them were going to the same 4-H clubs. The reason was that the 4-H had come down quite a bit in size. There weren't the number of 4-Hers involved that there had been a few years earlier. And we're seeing that today, you know, with the hit that dairy farms are taking on the price of milk, the number of dairy farms that are closing in Vermont. One time we had over 1,000 dairy farms. Now I think we're down around 800 and something. Many farmers are making it by diversifying. And we'll talk about that some other time. So I wish you all have a good week. May Almighty God in His infinite wisdom continue to bless these United States of America. Have a great week, and we'll see you all next week.